Flags are flying at half-mast across New York in honor of the late Mario Cuomo. New York's three-term governor died Thursday with family by his side, and tonight we'll look back on his legacy. Cuomo's death comes just as his son begins his second term in office. What will this new year hold for the governor? Our panel weighs in on some of the governor's potential successes and obstacles. Plus, will the NYPD patch things up with Mayor de Blasio in 2015, and what can and should be done to end the rift? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. Thanks for joining us. Tonight, people are mourning the loss of New York's 52nd governor. Mario Cuomo, the father of Governor Andrew Cuomo, died at the age of 82, leaving behind a strong political legacy.
In the city's streets, in the gutter.
He was arguably the most gifted and powerful orator of his generation.
How can anyone say that we are safer, stronger, or better?
Mario Cuomo gladly embraced the role, hoisting the banner of liberalism during a time when conservatives, led by Ronald Reagan, were trying to turn liberal into a four-letter word. Cuomo became the patron saint of liberals because he was an unabashed proponent of civil rights, a woman's right to choose, and putting people before corporate profits.
The Republicans believe that the wagon train will not make it to the frontier unless some of the old, some of the young, some of the weak are left behind by the side of the trail.
His speech at the 1984 Democratic Convention sparked a national following, but it was all sort of an accident because what he wanted was the vice presidential nomination. That went instead to fellow New Yorker Geraldine Ferraro. As a consolation prize, the Democrats gave Cuomo the keynote address. And to use the baseball analogy, a sport Cuomo loved in his youth and wanted to play professionally, the governor of New York hit it out of the ballpark.
We Democrats believe that we can make it all the way with the whole family intact, and we have more than once.
After Reagan's crushing defeat of Democrat Walter Mondale in 1984, Cuomo became a much-talked-about potential presidential candidate for 1988 and 1992. But he backed out both times. At one point, moments before he was going to board a helicopter to announce his candidacy in New Hampshire. He became known as the reluctant presidential candidate. But he was hardly ever reluctant in New York. He was elected governor in 1982 after serving as lieutenant governor and secretary of state before that. He even ran for mayor of New York against Congressman Ed Koch. It turned into a dirty campaign with anti-gay posters plastered through the city, saying vote for Cuomo, not the homo, referring to Koch's rumored sexual preference. Cuomo denied he or his campaign manager, his then 19-year-old son Andrew, had anything to do with the placards, but it tainted Koch's relationship with both Cuomos for years. Mario Cuomo was born in Queens, the Briarwood section, in 1932. His parents, born in Italy, ran a store in South Jamaica. Mario went to public school and then to St. John's, where while in college he signed to play professional baseball with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Baseball was the young Mario's first love. He was an outfielder, and he used the $2,000 signing bonus to buy an engagement ring for a girl named Matilda. Till the day he died, Mario and Matilda Cuomo were rarely apart. A career in baseball wasn't to be. Playing for the minor league Brunswick Pirates, Cuomo was hit in the head by a pitch. Back then, there were no helmets required, and his playing days were over. So he returned to St. John's, went to law school, but had a hard time hooking up with a law firm. He always thought he was discriminated against because he was Italian. Protecting the underdog, whether at ethnic or income level, would become one of the benchmarks of the Cuomo legacy. He was also against the death penalty, vetoing several attempts that would have restored the death penalty in New York State. Cuomo's final public appearance was November 4, 2014, at the victory speech for his son's re-election, the 52nd governor hugging the 56th governor, the only father-son governors in New York history. Cuomo insisting that his younger son, Chris, a CNN anchor, escort him on stage, perhaps realizing that this might be their last time altogether on a public stage. The governor's office says Mario Cuomo died Thursday, the same day that his son Andrew began his second term as governor. Cuomo died from heart failure at home with his family by his side. Mario Cuomo was 82 years old. And for some reflections on the life and legacy of Mario Cuomo, we want to bring in tonight's panel. Shelley Mayer is a Democratic New York State Assemblywoman and represents the city of Yonkers in Albany. C. Scott Vanderhoff is with us. He's an attorney and former 5-term Rockland County executive. Bill O'Reilly, Republican strategist, to serve as Rob Astorino's spokesman in his 2 successful runs for Westchester County executive. Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. And Nick Spano is here, former Republican state senator who represented Yonkers and surrounding areas in the New York State Senate from 1986 to 2006. Nick currently works for Empire Strategic Planning, a government affairs consulting firm. You have all had individual dealings with Mario Cuomo, and I want to go around the table and just get a sense of what he was like as a man, both inside politics and out. And Nick, we'll start with you. Describe Mario Cuomo.
A tough guy. I remember my first time I heard him speak, it was at the Enrico Fermi breakfast in the city of Yonkers at the Polish Community Center, about 800 people there. He was Secretary of State. He had everyone not on their feet, but he had everyone with tears in their eyes. Where he talked about his humble roots, he talked about his parents, he talked about his family, and that's the Mario Cuomo that I knew and that I remembered, and that you have fond memories of. Someone who just loved what he did. He loved being Secretary of State. He loved being governor of the state. And regardless of party affiliation, I mean, we disagreed at times on between Republican and Democrat, but when it came down to getting the job done, he was there. He was able to transcend politics and do it.
Assemblywoman?
Well, I think of him as someone who really relished the role of government. He really believed it, and he was unafraid to differ from others, but not in a yelling way. He believed you could, with passion, explain your point of view, and you should. I mean, we shouldn't minimize his role on these issues of death penalty and abortion. He was against the tide, but he wasn't strident. But he was articulate, he was persuasive and passionate and emotional at the same time. He was a remarkable person in politics. And my husband and I started, my husband was involved in his labor campaign in Western New York. Here was this very New York City guy, every working person in Western New York, totally identified. He was so authentic about being a working person.
Scott?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, when I was a young lad, I was working for Nelson Rockefeller, Malcolm Wilson, and then Hugh Carey for the first 6 months. And Cuomo came in as Secretary of State, and there was obviously friction there. The Carey-Cuomo thing didn't quite work out, even after he became Lieutenant Governor some years later. But the one thing I remember thinking, still thinking, is that 1984 speech. Here you had Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, and Mario Cuomo stood up and gave that speech, and it said, we're here, the Democratic Party's here. I didn't agree with almost anything he said, but it was a great speech, and it changed, kind of the looks of the Democratic Party. Of course, I think, but of course, he then became governor. My first year as county executive was governor, and I was told very early on, he's very political, be careful.
Bill?
It's funny, I couldn't stand the speech, the 84 speech. It was that good. I remember watching it thinking, boy, this is pretty good stuff. I think Senator Spano got it right. He was tough. I mean, he was both a street fighter and a grand thinker. He was a true intellectual, a true scholar, a Catholic scholar, and at the same time, he was the kind of guy who would knock you right in the nose if you hit him. And it's rare that you get both of those in a single person. Great speaker. I remember being sent by another great speaker of the day, Senator Roy Goodman, that Senator Spano remembers well. Very articulate guy. I was sent to go size up Mario Cuomo in a room in about 1986, and I went there to take furtive notes, and I found myself nodding my head as he was talking. I mean, he was like persuading me, and I had to stop nodding my head because they knew I was the opposition. So it was tough.
Dominic?
Great man. I would agree with the senator. He was a tough guy as a journalist covering him. I looked at the governor in awe. I knew him for numerous years. To date, I have never seen such a big thinker, someone who's willing, who can speak as good as Governor Cuomo, and that includes his son. Sometimes when you listen to the current governor, you have to pinch yourself and think twice because they sound almost like each other. But in my opinion, by far, Mario Cuomo is the better speaker. He was a tough guy. If he felt as a journalist that you were wrong, believe me, he would tell you about it. He would have no bones about that. Right. It would be a private conversation. And so, but you always had enormous respect for the guy. I have never met a more principled politician in my entire life.
And I think, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think one of the reasons is he believed, you have to admire him, he believed fully in what he talked about. And therefore he became eloquent about his own internal beliefs, whether they were philosophical or political or what have you. So there was no, unlike a lot of politicians, it wasn't a charade. He was what he was.
I've heard a lot and read a lot today about his personality, his integrity, and his positions, his progressive positions. But trying to get a gauge on how effective a governor he was. I mean, there was some early success with the budget. He was successful with environmental policy and healthcare. The state was out in front on AIDS at a time when Ronald Reagan wasn't even mentioning the word. But there weren't a lot of standout successes, at least from my reading of his legacy today. And I'm curious what his legacy as governor was. Was it more inspirational or aspirational? And how effective he was at actually putting the policies that he talked so well about into place. And I'll go around the table again. Scott?
Well, he coined the phrase, I believe, you campaign in poetry and you govern, or someone did. His prose wasn't as good as his poetry, quite frankly. Now, he was tough recession times. I mean, it was very difficult. But he never really accomplished the legacy. And I think some of the interviews that I read, and Nick might know better, but he regretted that he didn't have one thing that he accomplished that he felt very worthwhile.
I would differ. I think that one of the things he did remarkably well is he picked strong commissioners, smart people who exercised leadership. It wasn't the do what I say. It was like Dr. Axelrod in the health department. The guy was a remarkable leader. People disagreed. He was a visionary on AIDS, and no one was talking that way. And Governor Mario Cuomo allowed his commissioners, with all due respect for our current governor, who has a different approach, this guy allowed his commissioners to lead, exercise creativity and good judgment, and really take the state in a different direction. I give him tremendous credit for that.
I remember a couple of the issues that were controversial issues. I was in the Assembly then, before I was elected to the Senate, and one of them was the seatbelt law. Another one was raising the drinking age from 18 to 21. And on the drinking age one, I'm sitting in the Assembly, and someone was before cell phones, and you had to go into a telephone booth, and someone comes, they said, "Assemblyman, the governor's on the phone." And I said, "Governor's on?" I go out. And I've got a friend named Mario, and he likes to kid around. And I for sure, I was going to say, "Come on, Mario," but good thing I didn't, because it was him, and he heard that I was going to vote against the bill. By the time I finished the conversation, I was voting for the bill. But that told you. Now I'm a Republican member of the Assembly, not all that important in the process, but was important at that point. But those were just two issues. Another one was the mental health issues. I chaired the Mental Health Committee in the state Senate at a time when we passed landmark legislation where we closed down outmoded institutions and reinvested the money into a community-based system of care for people with mental illness. And it was the governor who I went to directly, and he overruled his own division of budget and the commissioners and said, "We are going to pass a Community Reinvestment Act that will capture monies and build a real system of care for people with mental illness." That tells you about how compassionate a guy he was.
I got to jump to a break. After the commercial, we're going to take a look back at some of the political highlights of Mario Cuomo's career, and one of the lingering questions: why didn't he run for the White House? He had every opportunity in '88 and '92, and would he have beaten Bill Clinton in 1992? Our panel weighs in when we come back.